Alrighty, welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for taking time today for joining the Bike Ped Infrastructure in Rural Areas Virtual Peer Exchange session. My name is Krishna Kunupareddy, and I work for National Association of Development Organizations and NATO Research Foundation, with the help of AASHTO Center for Environmental Excellence, have put together this session. And just real quick, if you don't mind putting your name and the organization name in the chat box, that'll be helpful. Thanks again, and I will turn this over to Kelly from AASHTO.
Thanks, Krishna. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Cornell Liu. I'm the Program Manager for Environment at AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. At AASHTO, I am the liaison to the Committee on Environment and Sustainability, but I also manage the Center for Environmental Excellence. The center is run by AASHTO in cooperation with the Federal Highway Administration. It is designed to serve as a resource for transportation professionals like yourselves, seeking technical assistance, training, information exchange, partnership building opportunities, and easy access to environmental and sustainability tools. If you're not familiar with the center, you can visit us online at environment.transportation.org, or if you have questions and want to learn more, you can reach me directly at kclew@aashto.org. I'm going to introduce the three speakers we have for today, starting with Mandala Moyo. Mandala drives AARP's Livable Communities Diversity and Inclusion Strategy. Previously, Mandala was on the AARP Indiana team, which he joined in 2011 as the Associate State Director of Community Engagement. Mandala has worked in multicultural communities in Indiana to build strong ties to strategic community organizations, local elected officials, and partners in support of livability policies and community change. We're also joined by Kelly Poore from AARP. Kelly is the Director of Outreach for the state of Vermont. She comes to AARP following 6 years at the American Cancer Society, where she led advocacy and government relations. She earned her undergraduate degree at the University of Massachusetts and completed a master's degree in sustainable development at the School for International Training in Vermont. Finally, last but not least, we have Matthew Deardahl. Matthew is a transportation planner with 15 years of experience building healthy and active communities in Minnesota. Matthew brings 7 years of experience as the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for Minneapolis Public Works, where he served as the technical lead for bicycle and pedestrian operations. Matthew also worked as the active transportation coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Health for 3 years, and has a Master's of Science in Planning from Florida State University. And I'm going to hand it back over to Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So let's go ahead and start the presentations. Mandala, you have it.
Thank you, Krishna. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone, for spending a couple of hours with us to talk about bike and ped infrastructure. We're as ARP, and I think as a lot of you all, we are obviously really excited to be here today. My hope with my session, or at least my few minutes with you all, is to share ARP's sort of vision and sort of why ARP is at the table and why we believe bike and ped infrastructure are important key resources for communities to ensure that their older adults are able to age in community, and not just building communities for just building communities that will sustain all of us as we age. And so at ARP, we believe that we seek to support folks like yourselves in building and designing those communities, not only for older adults, but for people of all ages and more importantly, people of all abilities and mobility types and mobility options. And I think a lot of us serve in those capacities. And so today's conversation is really going to be fixated on a lot of that. And so we take the approach of developing and building age-friendly communities and communities that allow folks to age well, because Father Time, much like the internet, is undefeated. And so we are all getting older. And so we all need to be considering how we are planning for the older adults and the people that are aging in our communities, and how they will travel and access the community resources that are laid out within the spaces and places that you all represent, and the places and spaces that we all live. We know that by 2034, there will be more people over the age of 65 than 18. And that hasn't happened ever in our country's history. And so we need to be dynamically thinking about how we are going to transform how people live, where people live, what the housing type looks like, but also thinking about the public spaces, how people engage with the communities that they are a part of, and more importantly, and sort of particularly to our conversation today, how people access the communities that they live in and how they get around. So what are the transportation options that we have? And so for us, it's extremely important because a number of our members want to age in community. More importantly, want to age in the communities that you all represent. So we learn from our members that overwhelmingly a large number of them want to age in place. They may not want to live in the same home, but they definitely want to live in their communities. We also know that for a lot of older adults, having safe streets and safe and accessible sidewalks are extremely important to their ability to live and age in place. And so we always sort of hear about the boomers are coming in older adults, but the same sort of reality is extremely important. The same needs that younger folks are sort of crying for and asking for in the communities that you all represent are very similar to the needs of older adults. And so why is ARP joining a conversation with you all today? We know that it is extremely important for us, or as a community, to be able to sort of provide accessible communities, but it's also older adults who are overwhelmingly the victims of pedestrian crashes. And so they are more likely to be hit and struck by a vehicle while walking. And so it is extremely important that we have a dialogue about how we can improve the sidewalk infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, and overall mobility options for our aging population, because they tend to be the higher victims of those crashes and those incidents. It is also important for us to sort of understand that those safe streets are also a safe place for all users, right? So a lot of us in this space are not only the bike coordinator, but more than likely we're also the pedestrian coordinator. So for us, we look at those terms as inclusive terms, right? The ability to walk and to be a walking and a pedestrian. We use those terms interchangeably, and then we know that it is extremely important to be able to walk and traverse the community that you are a part of. Next slide, please. So what is ARP doing? And I think this is sort of going to go into the gist and the meat of my presentation with you all today, and sort of sharing and hearing and sort of giving you an opportunity to hear a little bit more about the tools and resources that we have at your disposal and our disposal, and an ability for you all to access the number of tools and resources that we have created to help make the case for changes and updates in pedestrian safety. And so my job today is really to sort of highlight those tools. Both Kelly and Matthew will do a sort of more deeper dive into sort of how to use those tools and how they've used those tools in their communities to sort of help you all gain some ideas about how you can best use both a walk audit toolkit, and we also have a bike audit toolkit that I'll talk about later. But for a lot of you all also understand that a walk audit is a great way to go out and measure and self-assess the community that you live in to get a sense of where the transportation, or more importantly, the pedestrian infrastructure holes are within the community that you live in. And so for us at ARP, we have created a toolkit, two toolkits, that's a hard word to say, so two of them, both one for walking and one for biking. They both work and look very similar to each other, but they measure, one obviously measures pedestrian infrastructure and the other one measures bicycle infrastructure. Both tools are great ways to give folks access to a resource that allows them to tell the story of where the needs happen and where they can. And anyone can use it, but more importantly, from our perspective and talking about sort of from an inclusive perspective, anyone can access them. So it's www.arp.org/walk audit, and you can download that toolkit for free and use it within the spaces and places and communities that you all represent. And again, it's an opportunity to inspire and develop and start to have a conversation around where are the needs and where are the opportunities for development within our pedestrian infrastructure, and what our community and what our city looks like. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, the toolkit itself is something that you can use, or you can share with folks who are the champions for this work in your community. It is a step-by-step guide, again, to going around and looking through your community through a lens of the pedestrian. And it allows you also to make sure that you are including a variety of mobility options as you are traveling through the community and measuring and taking notice of what the spaces and places that you all live in, or more importantly, the champions for this work live in, and sort of allow for you all to look at where the sort of infrastructure holes are. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I am going to do my best not to dive too deep into the toolkit itself and how it's used, because I think Kelly's going to do an amazing job at sort of helping guide you all through what it looks like from on the ground perspective, and sort of helping and how you can use the tool to sort of impact change. So next slide, please. And then, so as we sort of try to work our and sort of building our story and building our teams, it's extremely important to sort of understand that the Walk Audit Toolkit is a resource that you all can use as a tool to sort of engage not only neighborhood folks or community leaders, but it is an opportunity to also bring in those folks who can actually implement and impact change in your community. So local city council members, county commissioners, your mayors, all of those folks can participate in the Walk Audit tool or the Walk Audit itself. And so, again, it's a great tool and resource that we have available at no, it's absolutely free and can be downloaded. It both can be downloaded or it can be sent to you directly from our office, and sort of go into the link to sort of help you through that as well. So next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, the tools themselves, or the Walk Audit Toolkit itself, gives you all the supplies and all the tools that you need to sort of create and develop a walk audit, right? And what we like to sort of share, and like what we try to sort of mention, is that we want to make sure that these are events or activities that allow for all users to participate, whether I can walk freely and walk on my own, I'm an older adult, a young adult, or I am an individual that uses a mobility assistance device, be it a wheelchair, a stroller, whatever the case may be, the sheets and the supplies allow for a myriad of folks to be a part of your process. And as I mentioned before, like a lot of the toolkit itself is available for you to download and have at your disposal and your usage as you need. So next slide. As I mentioned, the worksheet or the toolkit itself does come with a number of worksheets that cover everything from helping you design and make a map. So essentially, what streets are we going to look at? What tools and supplies you will need, and then also an opportunity for you to create a roadmap to where and how, what infrastructures are present. So what's currently there, and then what's missing. Um, Gauging driver speed. So if you're on a road doing an audit and you're trying to figure out, well, how fast do I feel safe walking on this street or being a pedestrian in this community? How fast are drivers reacting, signal times, all of those things are part of the worksheets that are provided to you as part of the toolkit itself. Next slide. And then our newest toolkit is one that we partnered with our friends at the League of American Bicyclists. It is our bike audit toolkit. It is, again, another opportunity and another space for folks to go out and present or take a look at their bicycle infrastructure. And it is a tool that, again, organizations, leaders, folks like yourselves can use to get a better sense or a better understanding of where we are now or where we want to be, and then what we need for the future. Next slide. And so very much like the Walk Audit Toolkit, we understand that a number of our streets are not designed for all users. And I think we all understand the term complete streets. And so therefore, we know that the streets that a lot of us have to travel along are designed specifically for the automobile. And so we need to start to develop streets and communities that consider all road users, all abilities, be it walking, rolling, or riding a bike. And so it's extremely important to also understand that a number of households do not own a car. Roughly around 8% of households do not own a vehicle and use either pedestrian infrastructure or biking to get to and from their places or traverse the community that they live in. So next slide, please. And so very much like the Walk Audit Toolkit, the Bike Audit Toolkit has its own set of worksheets, again, measuring, giving you an opportunity to look at mapping, to look at where gathering your supplies, what you will need to have those or have that event, and then sort of what infrastructure pieces are there, what infrastructure pieces are not there. The question I often or we've gotten before is about, do I need to be on a bicycle to do the Bike Audit Toolkit? And the answer to that question is no. You can do it at walking as well. But also, any other mobility device that you use to traverse your community, you can use either toolkit to sort of gain the knowledge, gain the understanding of what infrastructure pieces are available. Next slide. And so again, as I mentioned, there are a myriad of sort of worksheets that you will work through as you sort of gather your resources, gather your information, do your Bike Audit Toolkit worksheets. And these help you, again, formalize the story and more importantly, put it into language that you all as transit organizers, transit planners, elected officials use to talk about sort of infrastructure, understanding what a bike lane is, what's a shuttle, what do people use, right? Like all of those terms are not everyday speak terms, but are terms that are used by parishioners and leaders to talk about how they can better improve transit infrastructure. And so, again, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that you all are going out and using as many variations of bicycles or cycling or mobility options as you can. And so it is an opportunity for you to really go out and take a look at where your community is and what needs you need for a successful or to improve your bike infrastructure. Next slide. And so as I mentioned, the toolkit itself, and both of these do this, right? They are a opportunity for us to provide folks who don't normally have the language, or more importantly, the terminology, to talk to transportation planners, engineers, and have them share similar language in terms of why they want certain things, be it bike racks, be it storage racks, signage, any of those pieces. The toolkits, both of them, from the walk audit toolkit and the bike audit toolkit, allow for us to sort of put the language the transportation planners and engineers use into everyday speak. But more importantly, then that piece that you all can then present at the end of the audit is in the language that transportation planners and engineers and leaders and elected officials use to plan and talk about how they will improve the transportation and pedestrian infrastructure and bike infrastructure in your communities as well. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, the toolkit is not only sort of a resource for going out and doing an audit. It is also a tool that allows you all to educate folks about what bicycle infrastructure actually looks like, right? I know a lot of us represent communities that are of varying types, sizes, and spaces. And oftentimes bike lanes become a hot topic issue. And so it is an opportunity for folks to educate, especially elected officials, neighborhood folks, community folks, in terms of what infrastructure or bike infrastructure looks like and the different types of ways that we can achieve the bike lane, for example, the bike lane example of the bike lane and what that looks like in our community. And it's similar to bike racks, bike storage, all of those pieces are included in there. And so it does give folks a sense of how they can talk about transportation and pedestrian and bike infrastructure to the folks that represent them, and more importantly, to the folks that are in charge of transportation planning and transportation advocacy in their communities as well. Next slide. And then it gives some policy updates as well, or policy insights as well, where it can showcase sort of complete streets, and complete streets policies are something I think a lot of you are very familiar with. But there's an opportunity to also talk about how we can design a street for all users, right? Bridging the gap between bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and talking about how those two pieces work together to make a complete street, but also not shying away from the conversation about how the motor vehicle can work and act alongside pedestrian and bike infrastructure. And so it's extremely important to have the sort of broad-based all-user conversation and building our communities and our streets to reflect the users and people that live in those places and spaces. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, both toolkits do this, but at the end, when you've completed the worksheets, you've taken your pictures, you've created your map, you've gone out and done your assessment, they will give, or it will present, a full packet that is something that you can present to a lot of potential decision makers in terms of, we went out and audited or surveyed or looked into X and Y, Z streets, and this is what we found about our roadways and how the infrastructure needs to be improved, both for pedestrians and cyclists and even motor vehicles, right? So simple things like there's a signal crossing that may need to be adjusted to allow for folks to be able to walk across the street. That is typically in my my eyes, oftentimes a low hanging fruit, something that we can go out and sort of help and support quickly, because we can just like, hey, we need to adjust the signal light because it doesn't take long enough for folks to get across the street. Painting and striping, things like that. There's an opportunity for you to create a real report that you can then share and turn into an advocacy tool that you can use to sort of help you take action, and more importantly, for especially for the folks that are in the room, help you advise the folks that are coming to you for, hey, how can we better improve our bike and ped infrastructure? Well, go out and do an audit and then bring that report and then start talking about how those improvements can be done and how we can sort of better shape the community. So next slide. And so again, it does go into sort of, as I mentioned, strategies. Both tools feature a number of traffic calming methods and ways that we can redesign our streets, both from a temporary mode and for sort of temporary examples, and then for more permanent infrastructure change. There's an opportunity for us to continue to take action and use those sample ideas in those strategies, to make improvements that can be either permanent or temporary, to show what a particular roadway could look like for all users, and in this particular case for cyclists. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. And then more, again, it continues to sort of showcase how we can use the strategies within the toolkit to better improve our overall transit work. I have heard and seen communities do both audits at the same time, where they do a walk audit and a bike audit, and talk about how those two sort of can work together to build better and more complete streets for communities and spaces that we represent. And then, as I mentioned, the traffic signal example, there's always an opportunity to bring neighborhood groups and neighborhood advocates together. This is a great tool for gathering folks and gathering information about where neighborhoods are. It is also a great tool to sort of allow for inclusivity and building opportunities for you all to get a group of volunteers who are passionate about bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and creating sort of an advisory committee for those types of advocacy asks, and these tools and the audits themselves work really great for that as well. So next slide, please. And so, as I sort of get to the end of my conversation with you all today, I really want to sort of make sure, one, that there's an opportunity for you to sort of see and get access to these toolkits today. I'm going to drop the links in the chat for you all to sort of play with and take a look at them and see what the worksheets look like. But also know and understand that there are a number of resources available for you all from a ARP's perspective, and that's at arp.org/livable. There's an opportunity for folks to gain access to our newsletter and join and hear more about what's out there and what we are doing to improve communities for older adults. And then I'll be remiss to talk about all this and not sort of pitch an opportunity for you all to fund some of this work through the ARP Community Challenge Grant. I will drop that link in the chat as well. It's an opportunity to sort of take what you've learned in the audit space and say, hey, we have something that we may be able to fund from a demonstration perspective, and say, hey, we want to do something short term. And we need funding for that. The Community Challenge Grant is a great tool and resource for that. And I'll drop that link in the chat. and that application process starts in January. So you all get ahead of the game and get it to take a look around. So thank you for the time, and I look forward to the discussion groups later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandala. We'll have Kelly just a second. Alrighty, can you see the slides now?
We can. Thank you, Krishna. All right. I will take it away. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Stoddard-Poor with AARP Vermont, and want to thank Krishna and Kelly for hosting this webinar, and Mandala for teeing me up really well to talk a little bit about how I use the walk and bike audit toolkits in Vermont, and sharing a little bit of information and going a little bit deeper in how to really go about executing these audits to build support for transportation projects, or also being able to assess how well demonstration projects are going or pilot projects are going. These are really great tools for assessment, but most importantly, they're terrific engagement tools. They can really excite community members and really give them an opportunity for input. Next slide, please. So for all of you who do not maybe necessarily know where Vermont is or haven't been to Vermont, we're up in the northeast corner of the United States. It's a very rural state. I noticed that one of my colleagues from the Chittenden Regional Planning Commission is on the webinar, so which is really wonderful to see Eliana here. And so just a little information about Vermont. Our population is small, just 643,000. We're also the second oldest state in the country. The Northeast, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine leads the United States demographically. Our largest city is Burlington of just 45,000. And that population is spread out over 247 municipalities. So what that means is that we are made up of a lot of really small towns, and a lot of state highways run through village and downtown centers, which make it really challenging to implement complete streets. We adopted complete streets legislation back in 2011, and we've seen it adopted really well in some communities and not so well in others. I think there are a couple of reasons why. We've got a really old, aging infrastructure. There's a lack of capacity and training amongst municipal staff who perhaps don't have a planner. They really are relying on a volunteer network as well. And then just the reluctance for change can be really hard to adopt things like bike lanes. So we in Vermont, we take the approach with our transportation work through a placemaking lens. So we really want to think about how we can create place by looking at one of our largest assets, which is our public streets. And we begin that by making sure that when we are working with a community, that a project is really coming from the community, that it's being driven by the community, and that people are excited about the work. We think that ultimately that will help build social capital, and in the end will activate public spaces. Next slide, please. Because we know it when we see it, right? Like we know when we're in a community and it feels active and alive and exciting. Streets feel like they're connectors, not just a use for high-speed roads and cars to get from one place to the other. Next slide, please. And we also know it when we don't see it. And I'll just give folks a second to read this wonderful quote from Elijah Cummings around our transportation network. All right. So as we know, transportation can be that connector for communities, and it can also be the barrier to economic mobility. It can be a barrier to health issues, and it can be a barrier to social connectivity as well. So we really want to come to our transportation solutions in a really thoughtful way. Next slide, please. So when we're getting ready for a walk audit or a bike audit, there's some really key pieces that you want to think about when organizing one of these audits. The first part is identifying where are you going to conduct the walk audit. I really suggest not doing anything more than a mile round trip, and thinking about where there's opportunity to influence some change. So is the town in the process of doing any type of large infrastructure upgrade? If there is high crash happening in the area, is it part of perhaps a larger study project, or is there opportunity to leverage funding? Are you testing? Do you want to test a pilot or a demonstration? So really thinking about where is important, how you're connecting different key community assets in that process will be important as well. And then what type of audit? So are you doing a singular location, such as a high crash intersection, or are you doing a route? And that will also determine how often you want to go out and assess that area as well. And then who? This is a key piece. You want to make sure that you're building a really strong cohort of people who are going to be active participants in the walk audit and that are going to help carry through some of the implementation and priorities that are outlined in the audit. So thinking about obviously making sure that you have decision makers there, elected and unelected decision makers, business owners, schools, community centers, disability rights groups, and then also local media, so that they can help provide coverage for the audits as well, and then expanding that invite out to the general public. But you want to think about the diversity and the background of who's invited to participate in the walk audit, and you want to make that as broad as possible. Yeah, and then some of the materials that you want to make sure that you have are listed. And as Mandala went through in great detail, all of the different types of worksheets, etc. But some of the key pieces that I really like to make sure that are there available is I always bring along a speed gun, make sure that there's plenty of phones and cameras so that you have people documenting along the way. And then also bringing out, if, you know, as most of you are planners and are from RPCs, et cetera, making sure you have some devices for measuring sidewalk width and the street as well. And then also preparing for all types of weather. I go out and walk audits in snow, pouring rain, and also as hot as it sometimes gets in July or August here in Vermont. But making sure that people are really prepared for that. And so making sure that you have refreshments available for people before and after the walk audit is important. Next slide, please. So going out to conduct the walk audit, as Mandala shared, really help people familiarize them with the street vocabulary that you're going to be using. So when you have I always start a walk audit in a location where I can do a really quick overview of a presentation and making sure that we are have a shared vocabulary for what we're doing. And then if you have a large group, I would say more than 12 people, I would then divide people up into team assignments so that people often get overwhelmed by the number of worksheets. So you can have a group that is really going to focus in on street, on sidewalks. Others are going to be focused in on crossing. And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail of what you want to look at when doing those audits there. And so but two things that are really important, I always have somebody in charge of taking pictures and video, and also operating the speed gun and documenting the speed times and at how fast people are traveling. All right, next slide, please. So the scorecard, thinking about how people want to subjectively rank their experience, going from great to poor. This is obviously very subjective, but it's also important because this is people's lived experience of walking and biking in their community. And so it's really important for them to think about what would they give this as a score, and thinking about what needs improvement and what also works. And ultimately, I always ask people to think about how they're getting around in their community, and then to also put themselves into other people's shoes, and how they're getting around in their town. Next slide, please. And then making sure that you save time after the walk audit to do a really thorough debrief with folks. So it's really important because sometimes when you get back the worksheets, they're going to be halfway filled out. Sometimes it's hard to read. I always provide an electronic survey afterwards as well, so that I can send it out to the group and they can provide additional input. But making sure you have that time to debrief is really, really helpful. And thinking and getting those lists started about some of the quick and easy fixes versus some of those more long-term ones. And then getting people's ideas about what they think would be good changes in their community. It's really a great time to get people excited about those things and to get fantastic ideas that might not have come up beforehand. Next slide, please. So reporting back the results. So you want to make sure that the group of people that go out on a walk audit really stay engaged and involved afterwards, and making sure that they're part of that process as you move along. I recently have been working with the Regional Planning Commission in Lamoille County on a walk audit in a really, really small community. They invited AARP out to help lead the walk audit. And they're using this walk audit as part of to inform overall connection to a rail trail. And so they're leading that process, but they're keeping those people who were involved in the walk audit engaged throughout the process. So making sure that you're sharing that information out afterwards is really critical, and identifying those pieces that can be quick wins or ways that you can help build that momentum. Next slide, please. So just to reinforce this piece is that we always start from an assets-based approach. So thinking about what people really love about their community and what they want to see replicated is really important. I know that all of us can probably list a number of things in our own towns or cities that we live in that make it difficult to walk or to bike to locations, but looking around and identifying the things that you want to see more of and things that are going really well is a really great way to bring elected officials along in the process. So really start from that asset-based approach and where the opportunities are for connection. Next slide. So when heading out, and so now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail when you're going out on the walk audit. So when you head out on the walk audit, you want to be able to make some really initial observations and observations over time as well. So who's using the street and why, and also who is not using the street. There have been times where I've been out on a walk audit and there is a school right in the village center, and we are there at the time of school dismissal, and you don't see any kids walking or biking to or from school. So that also is an indicator of why not. Often it's related to safety. Cars are traveling too fast. Driver behavior is not conducive for walking or biking. So making those observations is really, really helpful. This is also an opportunity if you do have a large group of people that are interested in doing the audit. They can also do interviews. We have a great group of AARP volunteers living in the Old East End neighborhood of Burlington, and they've done a number of walk audits to help improve safety and specifically address poor driver behavior in their neighborhood. And they've done a lot of interviews along the way. And so doing quick little interviews with people that are out on the street can really help inform what's happening in the community. All right, so assessing mobility and access through a walking and biking lens. Next slide, please. So accessibility is really, really key here. And really, you know, as all of you are professionals in the field, you obviously know the key components that go into this. But one of the most important pieces that I often see in walk audits is really poor maintenance of the existing infrastructure. And so making sure that you're identifying where there's lots of debris, snow is not being removed, leaves are not being removed. Those are really important pieces from an accessibility standpoint. Lighting as well can really impact accessibility. And making sure, once again, that you've got a diverse group of people that are out on your walk audit using different mobility needs really helps to inform the audit. Next slide, please. So intersections are really, really important, obviously, because the risk for conflict is so high in an intersection. And so making observations on multiple days and different times of the day is important. So identifying a couple of your walk audit leaders to be able to go back on different days of the week at different times of the day to make observations, especially during commute hours, thinking about dusk as well. What's the lighting like? How does it change? What type of signage is available there? And then also thinking about who's avoiding the intersections. Sometimes my office is in downtown Burlington, and there is an intersection that I always avoid because as an able-bodied person, feel uncomfortable often crossing the street there. So looking at those patterns is also very helpful and will inform your audit. Next slide. So sidewalks and shoulders are really important. Obviously, in rural communities, a lot of times a sidewalk is not going to make financial sense to go into a community, or sometimes you've got to weigh the financial costs, and a sidewalk will go on one side of the street and not on the other. But the use of shoulders can be really, really valuable, and making sure that shoulders are available and clean of debris. You can see in that picture in the right-hand corner with all of the sand. This was done in the summer. It wasn't even right after winter was over, but lots of sand, and it made it really difficult for people to walk, or if you were in a wheelchair or using a walker or cane, it would make it also very hazardous. So really documenting that in the walk audit is important. Go ahead, next slide, please. And then also just the sidewalk width is also really critical. So a lot of times in the village and downtown centers, we're going to have really great infrastructure sometimes, but looking at where we can improve and make sure that the sidewalk can really accommodate all users is really important. Next slide. And then, as I've mentioned before, sidewalk conditions, having buffers when available is also really important. And then looking and documenting cracks in the sidewalk. And once again, when you have more different types of users, you'll have different experiences navigating the sidewalks. Next slide, please. So for crossing the street, a really important piece here is observing driver behavior, how well drivers are yielding to pedestrian and cyclists. Are they doing a lot of rolling stops? And really looking at how safe it is to cross the street, the time that's available to cross the street as well. Next slide. And then crosswalks. So the conditions of the existing crosswalks, but then also looking at other pathways that are people using naturally. Are they avoiding some crosswalks and crossing the street without a crosswalk in other locations? So making sure that you really are able to document all of that is really helpful. Next slide. And then looking and documenting bike amenities, where they're located, how accessible they are, and what is missing. Are there bike racks? Is there covered bike racks? What type of lighting is available? Are there bollards for the bike lanes? So making note of all of those amenities and where amenities would be welcomed. And then overall comfort and appeal. What makes the community welcoming? Looking at different types of amenities that are available: benches, street trees, rain gardens, wayfinding, lighting, and public art can all help really bring a community together. And those can often be some of the quicker fixes that people can, community groups can really take and go and run with. Next slide. And then I always think it's important to connect all of this work back to public transit, and making sure that you're noting where public transit is available. What do bus stops look like? What sort of amenities are available to bus stops? And in the upper right-hand corner, that was a temporary bus shelter that we put up as part of a demonstration project in Bethel, Vermont. And that led to more improved permanent bus amenities down the road. But making sure that you're connecting with the transit provider in the community is really important, because there's a lot of potential there. And then, ultimately celebrating your wins. And we all know that this work takes a lot of time. And making sure that you're keeping that momentum and communicating out the change and the progress that you're making is really, really important. All right, next slide. And then lastly, just a note to thinking about partnerships. That is, I think, one of the advantages in rural communities is that partnerships can happen really easily. And so really bringing along all the partners in your community to help bring about change, thinking about how you can influence policy, from complete streets to different types of program and funding for walk bike infrastructure, and then zoning upgrades, and then addressing parking minimums, density limits, and supporting mixed use as well. So those are just a few there. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Matthew.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just reintroduce myself real quick with the picture on the right. That was me back in 2008, I believe, when I first got my start with the Headwaters Regional Development Commission up in Bemidji. So I just wanted to share that because I was really excited to have the opportunity to come talk to you today. I love working with regional planners in rural parts of the state. And so I guess, yeah, Matthew Dudall, I'm a senior planning associate with Alta Planning and Design. And I think the work that Mandala and Kelly just shared is incredible work. I've been doing walk audits in Minnesota for many, many years around active transportation, and their resources are very helpful and user-friendly. So definitely encourage you to follow up on that. Today, basically, there's a great transition from the walk audit to quick build projects. Let's see. What I'll say just off the bat is this is a 3-step process that just works really well. Anytime there's a question in communities that you may be working with, like what should we do here? We have an issue. I would always recommend this three-step process that can really build momentum quickly in communities that are trying to advance active transportation. And so the three-step process is do a walk audit, walk or bike audit. Sometimes we do walkable community workshops that sort of go beyond just the walk part and really dig into planning around active transportation. And the second one is develop design concepts based on locations chosen from the walk audit, and then move into implementing quick build installation. So back to the learning objectives. What I'm really hoping that you get from this today is either newfound, renewed, or confirmed energy to explore demonstration projects. I think the demand out there is ever increasing. There's a federal program called Safe Streets for All, where there's millions of dollars across the country of communities exploring safety issues and developing safety action plans. And so many of those are being completed now or recently. And we know that all of those communities across the country are going to be applying for infrastructure dollars. Not all of them will get it. And then also the ones that are awarded, that's several years into the future. So quick build and demonstration projects are a really good way to kind of gain some momentum in the meantime. And so that was an example of I'm hoping you can also incorporate these ideas that you're learning today into your work. Like I said, safety planning, it could be bicycle and pedestrian planning. If you work with communities on developing projects or like programs in the capital improvement program, that can be a really good opportunity to test some of these things. And then also, I know a lot of the regional development organizations, one of the key roles is to coordinate between local communities, so cities, counties, and then the state DOT, and that can be an opportunity as well. Because ultimately, the goal here is to build support for active transportation infrastructure that meets the needs of people of all ages and abilities, like we just heard about. I'm gonna really focus on Minnesota as a context for this discussion. So Alta worked with the Minnesota Department of Transportation to develop the Demonstration Project Implementation Guide, which I think is extraordinary that it took place at all, because this is the DOT sort of signing off on an approach to this type of thing, which has really helped sort of streamline some of the processes. It allowed the state DOT to think about liability and like different steps that need to take place. I'll say I don't think it's necessary to have a state demonstration guide to do this, but it's definitely been helpful. So this guide is a resource for communities across the state to implement these types of demonstration projects that we'll get into. And then we've really seen it gain traction in a Safe Routes to School planning context, where communities across the state are completing Safe Routes to School action plans and then connecting a demonstration project to it the following spring, which is just a great way to continue momentum. So I'm going to share the link in chat here, if I can find it quickly. Okay, it kind of went away. I'll come back to the chat later. So within the guide, there's a step-by-step instruction that is really helpful once you get involved. And I'll kind of go over it in a little bit more detail here. But this is just, you can print this right from the guide and set up your whole process just from this guide. And it gets into 6 months out, to a couple months out, to a couple weeks, and then the day of, and then also following up. So it's a really great user-friendly guide. So what are we talking about with demonstration projects? In this context, we're talking very short-term, low-cost, temporary roadway improvement projects. And I'm going to distinguish what we're talking about today from a slightly more robust concept called quick build improvement projects. It's pretty much the same thing, just different duration. So demonstration projects are typically, anywhere from a couple of weeks to hopefully several months. In Minnesota and other cold climates that have winter, it's probably best to have a goal of doing all the planning over the winter, installing in the early spring after street sweeping, and then have the demonstration project stay in through the summer and early fall, and then you can pretty easily remove it ahead of the winter. With quick build projects, same materials, but slightly more robust installation. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but the difference could be, sticky tape that you just step on to make it stick to the road versus actually painting with latex paint or something more robust. And then, like in this picture, you see bollards. In this context for demonstration, they're like more or less glued on with a sticky pad. And then if you're going to have a quick build project, it would be drilled into the pavement. So just some small details. Both are really good options to help advance active transportation. And so a good purpose of a demonstration project is to build support for that longer term improvements. And like I believe Kelly said earlier, it's best to pick locations and pick these types of projects when there's already some momentum in the community. And maybe even a project that's already in the CIP or the transportation improvement program. All right. So why do we do this? I think we've covered the basics, but it's just a really good way to build momentum. It's good to try certain things. I've seen cases of demonstration projects where one location will have a bump out, for example, and then another location will have a center refuge island, and sort of kind of see how both of them work, and is there more interest or support for one versus the other. I find that the biggest reason to do this is that momentum thing. So if there's a group of people that are really interested in making it safer to walk and bike in a community, it's a great way to build support and bring people along. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And I think it covered all of this. So choosing a location, I think is really interesting, and that's where the walk audit comes in, or a walkable community workshop, or maybe like a safe routes plan, or some type of effort to make sure that locations that you're picking have already been sort of vetted. There's already interest, conversations with the community, and then consider like destinations. A lot of those types of things. Also, I think this picture is a good example. You want to make sure that there's space to try these types of things. So most of the time, our streets are a little bit overbuilt. Maybe there's parking, like you can see in this case, that can sort of provide some of that canvas to try things. If it's just a 4-lane roadway that is, travel lanes curb to curb, that could be more challenging unless you're thinking about a bigger picture project like a 4 to 3 lane conversion. So those are just some of the considerations. And usually, back with the safe routes context, usually there's some type of site visit with dismissal or arrival, and you can kind of get a good sense of what locations would be most beneficial from that. And then project components, basically what this is saying is like, what design do you want to go with? It's definitely context sensitive. And like I said, a bump out is typically a really good place to start, just not to overcomplicate things. If there's parking and it's adjacent to a school, something like that. Bump outs are just tried and true, pretty easy to implement. But then you can get more complicated as you go. We've done protected bike lane. We'll share an example in a minute. Protected bike lane and intersection examples. You can do mini traffic circles. the whole spectrum of treatments you can do. And in the guide, I think there's maybe 6 or 7 pages of these different examples where you have a one pager that kind of gives the considerations for each type. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that guide. And then also, as we get into planning and design, the sketch on the left is pretty good, right? Like you don't need to do full design, full engineering plan sets that are signed for these, unless the road authority requires that. That's important to check into. But a lot of times it's just, on the back of a napkin saying like, hey, we have these parking lanes. Like, can we just put it there? I'll come to that question in a second. And then to the right of this is sort of just a next level up from a napkin sketch, which would be using something like Illustrator to basically draw out specifically where they would go. Now, I will also say in the implementation, it often is a bunch of people going out, taking the drawing, and then just getting, just kind of eyeballing it, getting it as close as you can. Typically, you want to bring it'd be great if you could have like a school bus out there or a medium to large truck out and actually take the turn with the treatment chalked out a little bit, because sometimes you need to like pull it back a little, or you note that you have a little more room. I think it's really important to not overcomplicate the design of this. I think that is maybe one of my pro tips. Again, unless the road authority you're working with has a requirement or a strong preference for that. And then installing is probably one of the most fun parts of this. We'll probably show pictures in a little bit, but often we'll work with a school and find like a class or 5 to 10 eager students to come out and sort of help paint a little bit, and that can be really fun and sort of build interest and support for the project. So the guide sort of lays out all of the installation and day of. You also want to think about maintenance throughout the planning process. Like, if it's by a school, could someone keep an eye on it for trash removal and things like that? Do you want to leave paint in case it needs to be touched up? Things like that. The bollards may get hit. That does happen from time to time. And so usually when we're ordering materials, we'll have a few extra that can be replaced if needed. And then also project removal, just identifying a person that's responsible for the removal as a part of the process. Evaluation of this, I think, is really important depending on what you're interested in. So a lot of times we'll work with communities to have a survey, see what people think of it. Also, just a process evaluation is really important. Like, what was it like to design the intersection, install it? How do people feel about that process? Is this something that they can incorporate into the more permanent versions? Okay, now I'll get into a couple, I think, fun examples. And I'll note with these first couple of examples, we've done a lot of work with the Minnesota Department of Health to deliver walkable community workshops and demonstration projects. And so I'm going to start with Aiken and then move to Bemidji. So Aiken, Minnesota, both these examples are in kind of the northern part of Minnesota. Rural state highways that come through the town and sort of serve as one of the main streets in downtown, and usually connecting or really close to like that traditional downtown. So with this one, I don't have a map, but the heart of downtown is just a few blocks to the north of this intersection. And we got the community together, following most of the advice of the AARP toolkit, and basically identified what's going on in the community. We picked a few locations that were important, and then landed on this First Avenue, and I think this was Trunk Highway 169 in the town. And so basically, it's an offset crossing. There's a park to the west, and then a lot of houses to the right, and then a school 3 blocks south of the intersection that we're looking at. And so this was an area of concern, both because of the offset crossing, and it's a state highway with normal sized lanes, but then parking that's very underutilized. So it's just a very wide street. And so we started with the idea of, well, let's just put some bump outs in to help with that crossing. But then as we thought more about the context and what's going on, we thought it would be interesting to have a path in the street for a few blocks down to the school to the south. So that's what we did. The walk audit taking place on the left here. And then in the middle of the screen, this is a good example of really promoting what's going on. So we worked with local public health, and they came up with a flyer and really did a lot of outreach and had a survey just to really get a sense of what people think of it. And I included this truck turning template because that can be a really likely hang up depending on the interests of the road authority. And so there's a lot of concern of school buses coming in and not being able to make the turn. And so we basically ran the turning movement and could sort of tell where the bump out could go based on that. And so I think it's important to do that, but also I don't, one of my big themes again is not to overcomplicate it if it's not necessary to, because you can just sort of do this day of and sort of get a truck, even just a big truck or a school bus, make that turning movement and then chalk it out based on that. So it doesn't have to be high tech. You don't have to have a consulting firm or anything like that to do this. So the outcome, I think these are great pictures. The before and after pictures on these can be really fun. And you could just tell, it could be partly because we're all wearing yellow vests, but even when that's not the case, you can tell that people really slow down when these things are implemented. So this is just an example, again, showing the school bus there that we had teed up to make that happen. And yeah, I think that's all I have for Aiken. And then the next one, Bemidji, from the Headwaters Regional Development Commission, and Tony Clares is on the call. So I got to work with him on this project a few years ago. And this was sort of peak COVID. And we were like, gosh, what do we do? Do we have a walk audit? I think people were still trying to figure that out. And so we set up an independent walk audit, which is a whole separate thing, but people were able to do it virtually and or on their own, which I thought was kind of interesting. So this part of Bemidji, the big lake is just to the north of here. Their downtown is just to the northwest. There's a large trunk highway and a county roadway that really kind of makes it challenging for people in this neighborhood to get to the grocery store, and there's some healthcare facilities over here, and Dollar General, just a variety of destinations on the side of the other side of the highway. And so we picked that location for that reason. And then we landed on a demonstration project that was a little farther, and I know you can't see my cursor, but a little farther, like 3 blocks north of the blue flag on the right, because in the walk audit and discussion after, we found that crossing that street, which is about 48 feet wide, very wide street, 2 lanes with really wide sort of shoulders that had a bike marking in them, and so it was high speed, really challenging to cross. There's also a shared path that was connecting up to the bicycle path, that shared path around the lake. And so that was the location that we picked from the walk audit. And this is actually a pretty interesting installation. It's essentially a protected intersection, protected bikeway intersection concept. So we introduced a buffer with bollards. Oh yeah, I have a whole, there we go. We introduced the buffer with bollards and the cross hatching to basically give that protected feel at the corner for bikes going through, and then also adding some friction to make it safer and more comfortable to cross as walking. And here's Tony in the picture. So yeah, that's the Bemidji example. It was a really fun one. You can see just a beautiful day. Nobody has a bad time on the walk audit installations. And then Burnsville, I just wanted to, the main point here is showing an example of going from the demonstration or quick build to permanent. And that really should be the ultimate goal as much as possible. And so that's all I have for this one. And then as I wrap up here, I just want to talk about materials themselves. We partner with a company called AMCA Safety, and they procure some really, really good materials for this type of work. And that makes sense in Minnesota, and you all probably have your own connections out there. But I just wanted to share what that kind of looks like. I think the materials for these demonstration projects can advance as we sort of like gain an understanding of proper bikeway separation and things like that. And that's what I think is really interesting about some of these materials, is getting more robust separation. Some examples of what that can look like. And then here's questions. I'll probably turn it over to Krishna in a second, but I think we're just really interested, both presentations, or I guess all three, on what questions you have for us. Do you all have experience doing this type of work? And then also, like, how could this help you advance your goals of your organization? And then Krishna, I'll leave it up to you if you want us to dive into some of these discussion questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thanks to all the speakers today. So we're gonna go do a quick breakout room session, and we'll come back to open up for more Q&A. So I know Brett is working on it. Brett, we are ready for breakout session. Thank you. I'm sure he's trying to pull in people in different rooms.
Yeah, just 1 second.
No worries. Thank you. I see a lot of questions pop up here. While he's doing, if you want to go ahead and answer those, that's fine. If not, we can come back to them later.
Yeah, I definitely say MUTCD compliance is a consideration for the material choices. We haven't found the need to do an interim approval. Usually we just work with the road authority, whether it's city, county, or MnDOT, to assess their comfort level with materials. And then, but that company that I shared, AMCA, they make sure that they're MUTCD compliant. And then also traffic control. So the question about safety of the kids. Traffic control is just like a really key part of the checklist, in making sure that that is properly included in the planning and then the installation itself. And then also we're very smart, right, about it. Like the kids will set everything else up and then be like, okay, now take this roller, step onto the street right here. All of us with vests are So we're not just it's not like homework or something where they just go do it on their own. It's a very controlled and safe environment. But a very good question. And sometimes the road authority may say, absolutely not. We don't want kids because of the potential liability. And sometimes you just have to go with that.
Thank you.
Room with us, so this could be to ask any questions you might have, or also just a space for some informal discussion. We do have some questions here, so I'll drop those in the chat. Let's see. And maybe we can just start with the first one. Again, just a space to share our personal experiences. So, can you share a specific or unique bike or ped challenge that your region or community has faced?
Something that we're noticing in our small towns is that small like dollar stores being placed on the outskirts of town, but then there's not any sidewalks planned for that. And smaller communities don't always have a lot of money to address that issue. So that's a small thing I'd like to throw out there for discussion.
Does anyone want to comment on that?
Kelly, I know Rebecca is an expert too. If you have seen any of those examples, like to share anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just share experience in Vermont. We see a lot of Dollar General stores going in. We do have in Vermont Act 250, which is a pretty progressive land use legislation that does require when there is new development that it has to have some connectivity. So I'm wondering whether you could pursue something from a policy perspective through looking at specifically land use for new development, and or if you have complete streets, whether or not that would help cover the connection, because there would have to be some type of construction that's happening to the road to get into the parking lot, right? So if the road is going under construction, would it then pull in complete streets so that you'd have to consider all users of the road for that new development site? I would lean towards more of a policy angle than trying to go town by town to try to get the infrastructure in, because the towns really just want the economic development. But if you can tie it in from a policy perspective, I think that would probably be the best way.
Yeah, then I would also just add, just from a try to shy away from having the conversation sort of in a vacuum, right? Sort of the economic development conversation, the land use conversation, the pedestrian and bike infrastructure conversation, having those in a vacuum, rather try to sort of how can we merge those all into sort of a broader sort of how do we better develop our community. Particularly speaking of sort of the Dollar General piece, I think for a lot of folks, those have become sort of the access to the neighborhood grocery store, and sort of telling the story about how we can ensure that all users and all parts of the community can access the grocery store itself or the Dollar General, whatever the case may be, and sort of not having them sort of be separate conversations. And I think it is a harder ask, but I think that's sort of where we have to sort of lead the conversation and not allow it to be something that's seen as a separate. And I think even bringing in, I think Kelly talked about it in her conversation, bringing in the corporate partner and sort of helping them sort of understand why it's important for them to have access to the community and to their store as well. Sort of how talking about how much slower a wallet that goes out if a wallet walks by or slowly walks by or walk past the community, and how much that can be an economic development driver as well. So.
So this is Rebecca. I work with the NATO folks and live in Montana. And when I travel to Vermont, I'm amazed at how quaint and adorable all the towns are. And you don't see big signs all over. So yeah, like those zoning laws and like form-based code, can make a big difference. And I know we've had some work in Montana. Yeah, we have the Dollar General stores and those kinds of places coming in. And one of our small towns, Red Lodge, Montana, went through the process of changing their local, like, to a form-based code. So any buildings that came in would have, the parking would have to be behind the building would have to be near the road, attached to the sidewalk, those kinds of things. And so any business that comes in, and they did have one of those box store types buildings come in, and they were, they had to follow the code. And so it fits into the, what the community wants it to look like, regardless of what the organization is. So I know that there are examples of that, and we've seen some of that around Montana. So hopefully that's helpful.
And just a thought too, Dana, for the communities that already have the Dollar Generals on the outskirts of town, perhaps leading a walk audit, and particularly looking at, as Mandela brought up, folks where the neighborhoods that are housing people who are walking there perhaps to get their groceries, and being able to bring them along on the walk audit would be really, really terrific. Because ultimately you could do some type of demo afterwards, like with a painted lane along the shoulder that would give some type of protection for people walking there, to just highlight the utilization. That might be an organizing tactic for the communities that are already in that, find themselves with the Dollar Generals already.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kelly.
There's enough shoulder in this particular town that I was thinking of, actually in the ditch. You can see the goat path in the ditch. So they're safe, from traffic. It's just not convenient. And then, overgrowth of vegetation and stuff nearby, and snakes and whatever could impede their safety. But I appreciate all the comments. I've taken notes. Thank you.
I do know we have a question in the chat box about obviously community pushback. Kelly Davis interested in potential, creative and low-cost outreach ideas. I know Matthew has covered some, but if there are any resources that you can drop in the chat box, that'll be helpful.
I wrote a response to Kelly Davis's comment in the chat, but I thought that AARP has an interesting take on reaching populations who maybe don't see themselves as pedestrians or bicyclists, but the case can be made that we're all aging. At some point, we might not be able to drive. It's good exercise to get out there and walk. So taking that approach might be one way to pitch to folks the importance or the benefit of pedestrian facilities.
One thing that I've noticed is that one thing that I think that active transportation and transit advocates do poorly is pitching it to people who aren't ever going to use active transportation. Like I have a lot of people, when I tell them I work for the Utah DOT, they complain to me about we have bus lanes on two of our major arterials, and people complain to me and say, "Oh, I hate the bus lanes. Why'd you put them in?" And I say, "Well, actually, traffic decreased on those roads by 1,500 cars per day after we put the bus lanes in, and they moved this many people." So, and then everyone's like, "Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. That makes it easier for me as a driver." And I've had similar conversations about sidewalks and bike lanes and stuff. Like, if there's a bike lane there, you know where the biker's going to be. The bikers know that you're in your lane, they're in their lane. Everyone expects to see each other there, and it makes their behaviors more predictable for you as a driver, and also every person who's on a bike is one less car that's in traffic with you. So I think really marketing to the people who are never going to use it, who are only care about how it impacts their commute. I think that's really one thing that we could do to advance the message of active transportation, because it really is a benefit for everyone. You just need to point out to people how it benefits them.
That's
An
a very
excellent
good
point.
point. Yeah. I was gonna get back to Kelly too to see if you have seen any examples similar in Vermont and how did things go with pitching the idea?
For what specifically? Sorry.
Oh, about community involvement.
For commuting, you said?
Community involvement.
Oh, community involvement. Yeah, I mean, community involvement, I would say, is probably pretty key. That is one of the advantages of working really with small communities. People tend to be a bit more engaged, and often individuals are wearing multiple hats. I think it's important to go specifically to locations to engage different groups that aren't at the table, and just expanding that partnership list is really, really key. Leveraging, if you have a weekly paper or any type of online forum, being able to get the message out over and over. When you're sick of carrying that message, you're probably just beginning to penetrate the community with that message, right? And to Jeffrey's point, thinking about who some of the end users are is really important. And to reinforce Mandala's point that he made earlier is that we all are aging, right? And it is likely we will all be outliving our driving years. And so when a quarter of your population doesn't have access to get to places that they need to go, we need to think about how we're making sure that people are able to continue to contribute to their community. So we use lots of different tactics as far as community engagement goes, and making sure that we provide, online options to in-person, and in some cases we still use direct mail, and also leveraging those printed weeklies as well to get messages out.
Thank you. Any other questions? Unless I just want to go back to our list of questions. If you have done any of these projects, are there any champions that you would specifically would point out to? I have seen in my community, one of the board member is very, bike ped interested in, so he has been leading the discussion. So I don't know if there are any other people like that that you would or have seen before worked perfect to bring the right people to the table.
I would just share an example I had. We had some students that were working on a street that has high-speed traffic just outside of our office here in Bozeman, Montana, and they organized a walk audit a couple weeks ago, and we did it at 5:30 at night so that people could come after work, and we had the city transportation engineer and the facilities director at the university come, and then that day it snowed, and then it got warm during the day and melted, and we just did like a half-mile loop in front of our building, but there were 4 different entities doing maintenance on the sidewalk, and so there were 4 very distinct conditions of the sidewalk, and so I guess it was just interesting. I hadn't done a walk audit at night in the snow before, and even though we didn't have that many people show up, we came up with some real tangible items for the apartments, you know, these 4 different apartments or building units, to kind of coordinate on their maintenance and just improve their maintenance activities by, you know, plowing the snow all the way to the curb cut. Some kind of simple things like that. So anyway, even if you have a small group, I feel like it'll make an impact here. And we learned a lot just by walking around in kind of, I don't know, icy, sketchy, cold conditions on some basic maintenance that we can do better at. And, you know, the facilities director at the university and the city transportation engineer took note of that. So just kind of an interesting experience for cold weather climate folks doing walk audits.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any other questions?
I had another thought on communication. Another thing that you can, this is, I mean, kind of a plug for myself, but social media is really a great way to get the message out. I'm a guest contributor to the UDOT Instagram occasionally, and it gets a lot of views. We did work on 62 bridges this summer, and the social media manager branded it as Bridge Fest, and there was like some cool graphic design and like fun videos, and people would come up when I tell them I work for UDOT. They'd be like, "Oh, you guys are doing Bridge Fest. I got stuck in road work the other day and I was so excited because I was like, wow, is this Bridge Fest?" Like, that's insane that people are like, "Oh yeah, road work. Woohoo, let's go. This is awesome." So you can do a lot with the power of a good social media campaign.
Great, thank you. So have anybody done any demonstration projects in your region or the community? Wanted to share an example, a successful one or not a successful one?
I can share. I don't mean to dominate, but we've done a lot of pop-up traffic calming projects in small towns around Montana, and we've had some successes and some failures. And one of the failures we had was in Ennis, Montana, where the main street, you know, goes through, or the highway is a main street, and we didn't. It was during COVID in 2020, and we had been asked by the city commissioners to do this project, and kind of came up with a bunch of curb extensions and crosswalks, and we took away a little bit of parking, and thought that the commissioners had reached out to the community, and the outreach hadn't really been done to the full extent we thought it had. And I think part of it was, you know, a lack of communication and the whole trying to figure out how to do things during COVID. But the project went up, and a couple days later, somebody tore down a whole bunch of the flex posts and threw them in one of the commissioners' yards. And afterwards, we had talked to some folks in the community who said, "Oh, if we had known that that was just temporary and what it was all about, we love that idea. We would have been more supportive of it. And so in subsequent projects, we do a lot more outreach up front, including the walk audit is a big part of that. And I've had some successes in Hamilton, Montana, where we did mini traffic circles. And then also in West Yellowstone, we just finished a project on a state highway where we just did some basic curb extensions, and things went much smoother. Moving forward, just ensuring that we have more, that everybody understands that the project is temporary and short term, and we're trying it out. And if folks don't like it, we have an online survey, that people can give their feedback. So, yeah, anyway, I'm sold on the pop-up projects. They can have a huge impact, and they're starting to lead to permanent changes in our town here in Bozeman. So I hope more folks can try them out.
Great, thank you so much. I guess we are gonna go back in the session mode right now. We're gonna leave in 29 seconds if anybody wants to share anything before we leave. We have 23, 22. Can do a countdown. Just kidding. You can go back in. Go ahead.
I shared an example in the chat of a demonstration project, not that we did, but one of our cities did. You can go through the street view and see what it was in 2022 compared to today, and see it was basically as the result of a fatality in the intersection. And the city council said, you have 2 weeks to fix the problem. And
We are back here. So I don't know if Kelvin is still on the call, but he was talking about a demonstration project. Would you like to talk more about it?
yeah, I was trying to hurry and get it all in before it turned over. I left a link in the chat. I don't know if it's still available to everyone, but it's basically the city was responding to a fatality, and the city council gave the engineer 2 weeks to respond to make a fix. And you can see the temporary roundabout that they put in before they can take the time to actually design a roundabout.
Great, thank you. Gonna be opening up for Q&A if anybody had any questions, comments, thoughts. Or do you want to report back from the breakout rooms? Thing exciting.
Hey, Krishna, it's Brett. So a couple things from our breakout room, and I'd offer this to everyone. Krishna, Carrie, and I are always getting requests from folks for various types of feedback. And so I'd love to hear more about it. It doesn't have to be here, but afterwards, if you could send a note or anything about your experiences, specifically with walk audits, how you're doing those, how they go. And I know we've got, we're trying to help some folks out through our TA program to do that, but anything you can share with us about how it's gone for you. We've had our own kind of individual experiences, but anything you can share with us, we'd appreciate that. One of the things we did talk about, Krishna, was some of those demonstration projects. Tony was making a great point that they look great. The bollards are good, but if you're in an area where it's seasonal, it's extremely difficult to maintain those with snow removal and other things. So kind of the seasonality of some of the demonstration projects we talked about in our breakout room, and thinking about that up front as you're planning for some of those kind of longer term demonstration projects is important, and make sure that we're intentional about that. So other than that, we talked about a lot of other things as well, but it was good.
I wanted to just also flag one other good resource from America Walks, because they do have a walking college as well. We partnered with them last year to host a Vermont-specific walking college. It was a virtual fellowship program where we trained 15 advocates across the state to become walking college fellows. And they've just been such a terrific resource to our state office, because we get a lot of requests for people to that want to have walk audits done in their communities. So, reaching out to America Walks to find that list of folks in your state who have gone through the walking college program is a great resource to help from an organizing perspective. So it's really important to engage community members in that process. And as professional staff, you might not have that time, or you might not have a comms or outreach person that can be supportive, and the Walking College program is a great resource.
Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else would like to share their breakout room?
I can share a bit from ours. We talked a lot about the importance of communication and how to get people that may not be interested in bike or ped infrastructure to sort of understand the importance of that infrastructure and different ways to communicate that.
Great, thank you.
I'd add one thing to that, Haley, and I think this is a good point. We didn't necessarily talk about this in our room, but I do know this from some of the experiences we've had, is that having a casual familiarity with the MUTCD is important. And I don't know what is casual familiarity? I don't know. But my point is, a lot of the conversations are like, just put a stop sign right here, right? Or just put a blinking light right here. And all of those things seem simple and logical, but like there's a method that goes into actually doing that, and conditions have to be met. And you can spend a lot of time trying to, like, this sounds worse than I mean, but like talking somebody off the ledge of like, we can't just put a stop sign right here. Like, and so having some kind of casual awareness of like what can be and can't be is important in those moments. And you may not have to do it in your walk audit, but in that process that you're going to go through, it probably is important to have someone that can help you there, because some of those suggestions can become overwhelming from folks, right? Because it just seems so easy and logical, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So that's my own like personal, like I've had that experience and would offer that to somebody else, is like, don't overlook that until the very end, because there would be nothing worse to come up with something and to turn out to be like, yeah, we cannot do this for whatever reason there might be. So if you can get yourself familiar with that at some kind of casual level, it's probably worth it. So that's what I would add.
I guess related to Brett's comment about being MUTCD compliant and how important that is, I'm curious. I know I saw that there's some folks here from state DOTs, and most of our projects have been on neighborhood streets, which have been a lot easier to get through the process. We're just starting to work with our state DOT on some traffic calming projects. So I'm curious what other people's experiences are in the state DOT's openness to some of these kinds of quick build and traffic calming on state roads that go through small towns.
So this is Nick from North Country Regional Planning Commission up in northern New Hampshire. So it's been a bit of a just kind of a learning experience, I think, for us in a really rural region and with DOT, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But they've been pretty perceptive, as long as, they've got specific requirements right now. They're looking to, update their standards and things like that. But overall, I think there's an awareness that these projects need to be tested out and tried out. Complete streets, safe systems, these things are really important. So they're willing to kind of test drive ideas. That's kind of what I've found. So it's been really nice to see that, versus when I was in Montana for a few years, any question about changing roadway geometry or even trying things out was basically a no in the region I worked in Montana. So kind of nice to see that change over time.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, we are starting to do some projects in Montana, but would love to learn from other states that may be, further ahead than we are.
Any other DOT folks on the call like to say anything?
I do have a thought. So as someone who cares a lot about urban design, and as someone who also works for a DOT, I talk to a lot of urbanists who hate me and think that I work for the enemy. But I will say one thing that a lot of non-engineers don't understand is that you have to come to us with data because it's drilled into our heads in engineering school that it's unethical to make decisions without data to back it up. So like for instance, the classic example that is taught in engineering ethics class is the Challenger shuttle explosion. The engineers went to NASA and said, like, this will explode. You cannot launch this. And NASA overrode them, launched anyway. It exploded. And the engineer one of the engineers who warned them really beat himself up for that his whole life. He did an NPR interview towards the end of his life, and the headline of the story was "God picked a failure." That was how he felt about himself, and so it's just drilled into our heads like you'll hate yourself for the rest of your life if you don't make data-backed decisions because people will die. So, data is the currency that you need to bring to the table to buy into the conversation. So, if you show up to the engineers and say, look, here's what the data says, here's the data on crashes, here's the data on safety, here's what the data says about making this more safe, here's the data about how this is an effective treatment. That is really the information that you have to come with to be considered valid by engineers. Whether or not that's a good thing, that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I'm Jeevanjot Singh from New Jersey DOT. Jeffrey made a really, really good point. In addition to that, I don't see any planners in depositions, right? Engineers do have to go to depositions. They have to defend the design. They have to make sense of why and what went wrong, and explain to that in a court of law, which planners, I have never seen any planners in a deposition room. So I think that is very, very important to back everything up with data, with stats, and with what we call the 28 Holy Grail proven safety countermeasures, like it or not. But yeah, we do have to we do have to put justifications. Sometimes we have the ability to override the MUTCD using engineering judgment. I know people hate the term engineering judgment, but a lot goes into analysis while you are defending why you're not doing the should and the may conditions in the MUTCD, because all that is discoverable and can be held against you in a court of law. So just wanted to bring that up as well. Great points.
Could I add something? I love these points, and in all of my experience, like we've done that. We have to do that. So it's a really good point. Also, there's so much good guidance. We're in the best time to be trying this work right now, because there's the FHWA separated bikeway guide. There's rural examples, there's urban examples, there's AASHTO, NACTO, so there's engineers and planners can also point to this really well vetted guidance, and that it's like these treatments aren't new and dangerous anymore either. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to add that, use the guidance that's out there to help make the case.
Anybody else have any questions or comments, thoughts? Exciting projects? Well, I don't want to pick on people now. I'm just kidding. Any pop-up demonstrations that you recently had? Alrighty, I don't see any questions in the chat box. Just gonna go ahead and wind up the session. And thank you so much for everybody to join the session, and thank you so much for the speakers because I myself enjoyed the demonstration projects and understanding bike walk audit. In my past life, I did help with the bike walk audit, but there are several things that I haven't noticed or paid attention to. So this is very, very helpful. You would end up getting a survey once I close out this session. So please take time to complete the survey because it's very helpful for us to understand what your needs are if we were to plan something in future, if there's any interesting topic that you would be wanting to join. So thanks again for your time and everybody have a nice week. Bye.